February 8, 2012. The Beverly Hilton Hotel, Los Angeles. Whitney Houston sat in a private suite 3 days before the Grammy Awards. She was scheduled to perform at Clive Davis's annual pre-Grammy party. The industry was watching. Cameras were everywhere. Everyone wanted to see if Whitney still had it, if the comeback was real. But that afternoon, during what was supposed to be a casual interview with a music journalist, Whitney said something that would send shockwaves through Hollywood. Something so raw, so honest, so damning about the music industry that the journalist almost didn't publish it. The topic: Amy Winehouse. The brilliant British singer who had died just 7 months earlier, at 27 years old, found dead in her London apartment, alcohol poisoning. Another talent destroyed. When the journalist asked Whitney about Amy's death, expecting a typical tribute, "She was talented. It's a tragedy. She'll be missed." Whitney did something unexpected. She told the truth. For 12 minutes, Whitney Houston exposed what the industry does to artists, how they exploit vulnerability, how they profit from destruction, how they turn human beings into products, and then act surprised when those products break. And when the interview was published 3 days later, the day after Whitney's own death, the music industry went completely silent. No responses, no rebuttals, no denial, just deafening silence. Because Whitney had said what everyone knew, but no one dared to speak. If you're ready to hear what Whitney revealed about Amy, about the industry, about the price of fame that nobody wants to acknowledge, hit that like button and ring the bell. Because this story will change how you see the music business forever. To understand why Whitney's words hit so hard, you need to understand the parallels between her story and Amy Winehouse's. Amy Winehouse burst onto the scene in 2003 with a voice that seemed to come from another era. Jazz-influenced, soulful, raw, real. By 2006, her album Back to Black had made her a global superstar. She was 23 years old. Whitney Houston had burst onto the scene in 1985 with a voice that redefined what was possible. Pop perfection with gospel soul. By 1987, she was the biggest star in the world. She was 24 years old. 2 young women. 2 impossible voices. 2 trajectories that would follow eerily similar paths. When I first heard Amy sing, Whitney said in a 2008 interview, "I heard myself, not the sound. Her sound was her own. But the vulnerability. The need to pour everything into the music. That dangerous thing where you give so much of yourself that there's nothing left when you step off stage." Both women struggled publicly with addiction. Both had tumultuous relationships that played out in tabloids. Both saw their voices, those magnificent instruments, deteriorate as the substances took their toll. But there was one crucial difference. Whitney survived into her 40s. Amy didn't make it past 27. When Amy Winehouse died on July 23, 2011, the music industry responded with the usual performative grief. Statements of sadness, tributes at award shows, hashtags, moments of silence. But behind closed doors, the same executives who had profited from Amy's pain, who had pushed her to tour when she was clearly not ready, who had turned her struggles into tabloid fodder that sold albums, those people stayed quiet about their role in her destruction. Whitney saw the hypocrisy, and it enraged her. "I watched them do to Amy what they tried to do to me," Whitney told a friend in late 2011. "They build you up. They work you to death. And when you start breaking down, they don't pull back. They push harder because your breakdown sells records. Your pain is profitable." By February 2012, Whitney was in a reflective place. She had been through rehab. She was 7 months sober. She was rebuilding her career, but this time with boundaries. This time with understanding of what the industry had done to her, and what it continued to do to young artists. That's the state Whitney was in when the journalist Marcus Davis sat down with her on February 8, 2012, in her hotel suite at the Beverly Hilton. What was supposed to be a light-hearted pre-Grammy interview became something else entirely. Marcus Davies had interviewed Whitney before. He knew her well enough to read her moods. And that afternoon she seemed different, contemplative, like she had something weighing on her. The interview started normally, Marcus recalled years later. We talked about her upcoming performance, her new music, her sobriety. But then I mentioned the Grammys and how it would be the first ceremony since Amy Winehouse's death. Marcus asked a simple question. Amy's not going to be at the Grammys this year. Do you think about her? Whitney's entire demeanor changed. Think about her? Whitney repeated, her voice quiet but intense. I think about her every day, because what happened to Amy is what they tried to make happen to me. And it's what they're doing to the next girl right now. Marcus leaned forward, sensing this was going to be more than a typical celebrity soundbite. Who is they? He asked. Whitney looked directly at him. The industry, the labels, the managers, the people who make money off us and then act shocked when we break. What followed was 12 minutes of the most honest, unfiltered critique of the music industry ever recorded by an artist of Whitney's stature. Let me tell you what killed Amy Winehouse, Whitney began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. It wasn't just the alcohol or the drugs. It was the machine. The machine that takes a 23-year-old girl with a gift and turns her into a product, a brand, a money-making commodity that has to perform and produce and be on 24/7. And when she starts to crack under that pressure, they don't slow down. They speed up. Marcus asked if Whitney was speaking from experience. Of course I am, Whitney said. I lived it. I'm still living with the consequences of it. But here's the difference between me and Amy. I had people around me who eventually pulled me back. My mother, my family. They fought for me even when I didn't want to be fought for. Amy didn't have that protection. She had enablers disguised as management. Whitney's voice grew more passionate, more urgent. Do you know what Amy's schedule looked like in the months before she died? She was barely holding it together, and they had her doing festivals, doing appearances, doing interviews where everyone could see she wasn't well. But nobody stopped it. You know why? Because a struggling Amy Winehouse sold tickets. A messy Amy Winehouse got headlines. Her pain was profitable. Marcus asked if Whitney was saying the industry deliberately exploited Amy's addiction. Whitney's answer was chilling. I'm saying the industry doesn't care if you live or die, as long as you're profitable while you're here. And if you die, well, then you become even more profitable. Ask Kurt Cobain. Ask Janis Joplin. Ask any artist who died young and then had their catalogs exploited for decades. What Whitney said next was so controversial that Marcus almost cut it from the final interview. Let me tell you something about this business that nobody wants to admit, Whitney said, leaning forward. When you're young and talented and vulnerable, they love you. They build you up, make you a star, tell you you're special. But that's not love. That's investment. You're an asset. And like any asset, they're going to extract maximum value from you before you depreciate. Whitney continued, her words coming faster now, like she'd been holding this in for years. Amy and I, we had the same problem. We felt everything too deeply. We couldn't just sing the songs and cash the checks. We poured our pain, our joy, our entire souls into every note. And that authenticity, that raw emotion, that's what made us stars. But it's also what made us vulnerable. The industry knows this. They know that artists who feel deeply are also artists who hurt deeply. And they use that. They push you into the studio when you're heartbroken because heartbreak makes great music. They book you for tours when you're falling apart because desperation makes for compelling performances. Your suffering is their profit margin. Marcus asked, are you saying Amy's management knew she was struggling and didn't help? Whitney's response was measured but devastating. I'm saying that in this industry there's a type of artist that's particularly valuable. The troubled genius. The tortured soul. The one who's brilliant but broken. And once you get labeled as that type of artist, The industry doesn't want you to get better, because your breakdown is your brand. Think about it, Whitney continued. Amy's biggest album was Back to Black, an album about heartbreak and addiction. Her most famous song was Rehab, where she literally sang about refusing treatment. And what did the industry do? They celebrated it. They gave her Grammys for it. They made her perform that song over and over, night after night, singing about not wanting to go to rehab while she desperately needed to be in rehab. That's not artistry. That's exploitation. Whitney talked about her own experiences with similar exploitation. When I was at my lowest, you know what happened? My album sales went up. My concert tickets sold faster. Because people weren't just coming to hear me sing anymore. They were coming to see if I would fall apart on stage. They were coming to witness the destruction. And my management knew that. So they kept booking shows, kept scheduling appearances, kept putting me out there for public consumption even though I was dying inside. Marcos pushed. But you had hit albums before your struggles became public. You were successful before the addiction. True, Whitney acknowledged. But I wasn't interesting. I was perfect Whitney. America's sweetheart, the girl with the voice. Boring. Safe. Profitable, yes, but not fascinating. It wasn't until I married Bobby, until my life got messy, until the addiction became public. That's when I became really valuable. Because now, I wasn't just a singer. I was a story. I was drama. I was someone people talked about at dinner parties. Amy never got to be boring and successful, Whitney said, her voice heavy with sadness. She came out of the gate as the troubled genius. That was her brand from day one. And once that's your brand, the industry has no incentive to help you get better. Your recovery would be bad for business. Whitney then said something that Marcos almost didn't include in the article. I'll tell you exactly what killed Amy Winehouse. It was a room full of people who knew she was dying and chose to look the other way because a dead Amy Winehouse would be worth more than a recovered Amy Winehouse. And I know that sounds harsh, but I've been in this business for 30 years. I've seen how it works. Dead artists don't demand higher percentages. They don't cancel tours for rehab. They don't fight for creative control. They just keep making money for the people who own their catalogs. The room was silent for a moment after Whitney said this. Then Marcos asked, "Are you afraid the same thing could happen to you?" Whitney's answer was haunting. Every single day. Because I'm trying to get better, trying to stay sober, trying to rebuild my career the healthy way. But I see how people look at me now. I'm not interesting anymore. I'm not the train wreck they want to watch. And in this industry, if you're not interesting, you're not valuable. That's why Amy's death hit me so hard, Whitney continued. Because I saw myself in her. I saw what could have been me. I saw a girl who had a gift, who had people around her who should have protected her, but instead they protected their investment. And when that investment died, they mourned publicly while counting their money privately. Whitney's voice broke slightly. 7 months. Amy's been gone for 7 months. And what's changed? Nothing. There's another young girl out there right now being pushed to the edge, being told to turn her pain into profit, being celebrated for her dysfunction while the people making money off her do nothing to help her heal. And in a few years, we'll all act shocked when she dies too. Marcus asked one final question. What do you think Amy would want people to know? Whitney thought for a long moment before answering. I think Amy would want people to know that she was a human being, not a product. That she was a daughter, a friend, a person with hopes and dreams beyond her music. I think she'd want the industry to admit what it does to artists, how it chews them up and spits them out and then acts surprised when they don't survive. And I think she'd want other young artists to understand that they have the right to say no, to take breaks, to get help, to be imperfect and messy and human without that becoming their brand. But most of all, Whitney said, her voice soft but firm, I think Amy would want people to stop romanticizing the tortured artist narrative. Because there's nothing romantic about dying at 27. There's nothing beautiful about addiction, and there's nothing poetic about an industry that profits from pain. Marcus Davis left that interview shaken. He had gotten far more than he bargained for. Whitney Houston, one of the biggest stars in the world, had just given him a searing indictment of the entire music industry. "I didn't know if I could publish it," Marcus admitted later. "Whitney had been so honest, so vulnerable, so accusatory. I knew it would cause waves." He sent the transcript to his editor. They debated for hours about whether to run it. "We ultimately decided to publish," Marcus said, "because Whitney's words deserved to be heard. But we planned to release it after the Grammys to avoid overshadowing the event." They never got the chance. On February 11th, 2012, 3 days after that interview, Whitney Houston was found dead in the bathtub of her hotel suite at the Beverly Hilton, the same hotel where she'd given that interview, the same hotel where she'd spoken so passionately about Amy Winehouse and industry exploitation. Whitney was 48 years old. Cause of death, accidental drowning, with cocaine use and heart disease as contributing factors. The music industry went into mourning. Tributes poured in. Celebrities posted condolences. The Grammys became a memorial service. And Marcus Davis had to make a decision: publish Whitney's interview about Amy Winehouse, or keep it private out of respect for the newly deceased. "I consulted with Whitney's family," Marcus explained. "I told them what she'd said, how passionate she'd been, how important her words were, and they said, 'Publish it. This is what Whitney wanted people to know. This is what she was trying to change.'" On February 14th, 2012, 3 days after Whitney's death, the interview was published. The response was extraordinary. Artists read it and wept. Fans shared it millions of times. Mental health advocates called it the most important statement about addiction and the music industry ever made by a major artist. But from the music industry itself, silence. No record label executives responded. No major managers or producers commented. No industry publications wrote think pieces about Whitney's accusations. The silence was deafening and telling. "The industry didn't know what to say," observed music journalist Lisa Chen. "Because Whitney was right. Everything she said was true. And everyone in the business knew it. But admitting it would mean admitting complicity in the deaths of dozens of artists over the decades. So they said nothing." Whitney Houston's final interview about Amy Winehouse became one of the most shared pieces of music journalism in history. Not because of her death, though the timing made it more poignant, but because she had articulated something that fans artists had felt for decades but couldn't quite express. The industry exploits vulnerability. It profits from pain. And it has no incentive to help artists heal, because recovery isn't as marketable as destruction. In the months following Whitney's death, things began to change. Artists started speaking more openly about mental health and addiction. Adele canceled tour dates to prioritize her well-being, citing Whitney's interview as inspiration. "Whitney showed me it's okay to say no," Adele said, "that my health is more important than profits." Demi Lovato, who was struggling with addiction at the time, read Whitney's words and immediately checked into treatment. "Whitney's interview saved my life," Demi later said, "because she exposed what was happening to me. People around me profiting from my pain instead of helping me heal." Record labels, feeling public pressure, began implementing mental health support systems. Mandatory therapy for artists. Limits on touring schedules. Protocols for when artists show signs of struggling. Were these changes genuine or just PR moves? Mixed. Some labels truly reformed. Others just got better at looking like they cared. The most significant impact was cultural. Whitney's interview changed how we talk about artists' struggles. Before, they're tortured geniuses. It's part of their art. After, they're human beings being exploited. We need to protect them. The romanticization of the 27 Club, the idea that dying young makes you legendary, began to be challenged. Whitney's words had exposed how toxic that narrative was. We used to celebrate artists who died young, noted Dr. Sarah Morrison, a psychologist specializing in entertainment industry mental health. We'd say they lived fast and died young like it was glamorous. Whitney forced us to confront the reality. They didn't live fast. They were worked to death. They didn't die young. They were killed by an industry that valued their productivity over their survival. Amy Winehouse's father, Mitch, read Whitney's interview and wept. Whitney understood what happened to Amy in a way that even I didn't fully grasp until reading her words, Mitch said. She was right. The industry wanted Amy troubled because troubled Amy sold records. And we, her family, her management, we didn't protect her from that. We should have pulled her out of the spotlight. We should have said no to the tours, the appearances, the constant pressure. But we didn't, and Whitney's words made me face that. The Amy Winehouse Foundation, established by Mitch after his daughter's death, incorporated Whitney's interview into their educational programs about addiction and the music industry. They teach young artists about the exploitation Whitney warned about. They train them to recognize when they're being pushed too hard. They empower them to prioritize health over profits. Whitney and Amy's legacies became intertwined. Two brilliant women. Two impossible voices. Two cautionary tales about what happens when the industry values profit over people. But also two voices that, even in death, forced an industry to confront its sins. Musicians today cite Whitney's interview as required reading. Billie Eilish. I read that interview when I was 16. It taught me that I'm allowed to have boundaries, that I don't owe anyone my suffering. Lizzo. Whitney's words about Amy showed me that self-care isn't selfish, it's survival. Sam Smith. That interview should be mandatory reading for anyone entering the music industry. It's the truth nobody wants to say, but everyone needs to hear. The interview also sparked academic research into exploitation in the entertainment industry. Universities developed programs studying the psychology of fame, the ethics of artist management, and the systemic changes needed to protect vulnerable performers. Whitney Houston's final interview became a watershed moment, said Professor James Chen of Berkeley's Music Industry Ethics program. It was the moment an A-list artist said out loud what everyone knew privately. The industry is designed to extract value from artists, and if that extraction kills them, the industry profits from their death too. Perhaps the most powerful legacy, the conversation itself. We now talk openly about artists' mental health in ways we didn't before Whitney's interview. We question touring schedules that seem punishing. We call out management that seems exploitative. We recognize that artists are human beings, not products. Is the industry perfect now? No. Exploitation still happens. Artists still struggle. Some still die too young. But now, at least, we're having the conversation. We're acknowledging the problem. We're trying to do better. And that's what Whitney wanted. 3 days. That's how long Whitney Houston lived after exposing the truth about what the music industry does to vulnerable artists. 3 days between speaking truth to power and dying the same death she'd warned about. The irony is almost unbearable. Whitney spent 12 minutes explaining exactly how the industry kills artists. The exploitation, the pressure, the profit motive, but that overrides human well-being. And then became another example of it. Some people see this as tragic irony. Others see it as vindication of everything Whitney said. The industry didn't save her any more than it saved Amy. But here's what Whitney's interview teaches us. First, speaking truth is valuable especially when it comes too late to save you. Whitney couldn't save herself or Amy, but her words have influenced how we treat artists now. They've saved others. That matters. Second, the industry hasn't changed because it felt bad. It changed because it got exposed. Whitney pulled back the curtain. She forced people to see the machinery. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Third, we're all complicit. Not just record executives and managers, us too. Every time we consume artist pain as entertainment. Every time we click on headlines about celebrity breakdowns, every time we treat struggling artists as spectacles rather than human beings, we're part of the problem Whitney identified. Think about this. How many artists are struggling right now while we watch? How many young talents are being pushed to the edge because their pain is profitable? How many times have you consumed someone's breakdown as entertainment without thinking about the human cost? Whitney's final message wasn't just about Amy. It was about all of us. About the culture we've created where vulnerability is currency, where suffering sells, where we've convinced ourselves that tortured artists make better art. They don't. They make traumatized art. There's a difference. And here's the real question Whitney's interview forces us to ask. What if Amy Winehouse had been protected instead of exploited? What if Whitney Houston had been allowed to be human instead of perfect? What music would they have made? What lives would they have lived? We'll never know. And that's the tragedy Whitney was trying to prevent. If this story moved you, if Whitney's words made you see the music industry differently, hit that like button and share this video. Her message deserves to be heard. Artists deserve to be protected. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we keep telling stories that expose uncomfortable truths and honor the voices that fought to change them. Until next time, remember, behind every artist is a human being. Behind every performance is a person. And their survival matters more than our entertainment. Rest in peace, Whitney Houston and Amy Winehouse. Your voices are silent, but your truth echoes on.